I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Brian Wilson.
And joining us on the line right now is KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst. You can follow her at KT McFarland. I do. You should too. You learn all kinds of neat stuff when you follow KT. KT, good morning to you.
Good morning.
All right, Hillary Clinton, she's out there. She got a book. She's talking to reporters, and they ask her about Benghazi. Here is Diane Sawyer asking her if she had any regrets.
I take responsibility, but I was not making security decisions.
She was not making the security decisions. She says she simply was hiring the people that made those decisions. She was responsible overall, but really the people who she hired didn't make good choices and good judgments about the situation. That's sort of a synopsis of what she said.
Is it just me, or is everybody in America now in this mode of, I'm a victim, and it wasn't my fault, and look, I didn't mean to do this? It's like nobody's ever held responsible for anything. There's always an excuse. I mean, somebody's always whining. And Hillary Clinton saying, well, you know, I didn't mean to have anything go wrong. I was doing my job. The guys under me weren't. Well, where does the buck stop? Does the buck just stop nowhere? And I guess the whole thing makes me a little sad because Hillary Clinton has portrayed herself as this tough person who makes tough decisions. And yet, what's wrong with saying, we goofed up? You know, this is a great tragedy. We didn't provide the adequate security. And yet,
and you know, most Americans, if they heard that, they would say, I appreciate her honesty, and you know what? Mistakes do occur, and they would move on. But instead you get this sort of finesse, well, I was responsible, but not really.
Yeah, and I shouldn't be punished, therefore, because I wasn't really responsible. Now, however, if it had gone well, I would have definitely been responsible, and I'll take full credit for anything that goes right. I mean, but it's not just Hillary Clinton. It's President Obama. I didn't know anything about that till I read it in the newspapers. Or it's people on Congress. Well, we didn't mean to have anything bad happen. We had good intentions. And so somehow nobody's worried about the results anymore. It's all about good intentions and excuses and avoiding responsibility for outcomes. And, you know, I just don't think that's what America used to be. And I'm a little upset at the fact that it seems to be so pervasive in our society. When my kids were growing up, we had a sign above the kitchen table that just said, stop whining. And I think it's something that we should put, all Americans should just get this new theme, which is stop whining, stop complaining, no excuses, get it done.
Well, KT McFarland, I'm told that Hillary Clinton is our most successful Secretary of State in the United States history. She's the most accomplished, most traveled. She was just the brilliant Secretary of State. I'm sure you might have an opinion on that. But her first act as Secretary of State was to push that reset button with Russia. You just came back from Ukraine. How's that reset working out for the people of Ukraine?
Oops. Putin is just dancing circles around certainly the United States, but really the world. He has now invaded Ukraine, okay? But he's been smart and clever enough to realize that you don't send in the tanks when you invade anymore. He's developed a new form of hybrid warfare, which is send in special forces, just have them take the Russian insignia off their epaulets, and have them go in and pretend that they're not really Russians, destabilize economies using economic and energy warfare, and use a propaganda machine. And as a result, Putin has plausible deniability. I didn't do anything, not my fault. And yet what's the result is a destabilized country. I mean, Ukraine is in a dreadful position. They're fighting two wars. One, there's in effect a Russian invasion on their east, and two, the second war is internally against themselves. They are corrupt and incompetent economic and government system, and I don't know that they're able to defeat both, to win both wars at the same time. I'm not even sure they can win either one.
I was watching some of these documentaries about the Second World War the other day when the anniversary of D-Day came along. And one of the things that struck me, KT, was that indeed it is true that Putin is following the model that Hitler followed when he conquered countries. He would go in and say, I need to take care of the German people in this country. And then he would just take over the whole country.
Well, exactly, and do it incrementally. You don't do it all at once. You do it with a blitzkrieg. You do it incrementally, and you get the same result at the end of the day. I think that what happens in Ukraine is Putin is watching to see the Western reaction. He realizes that the Europeans, the Germans, the French, the Brits, they don't want to endanger their relationships, economic and energy relationship with Russia, so they're looking for any excuse they can get.
Yeah.
And President Obama is a very weak president.
A policy of appeasement, just like Neville Chamberlain.
Well, everybody's looking for their out, and Putin understands, I think he's aimed at really showing NATO to be a weak and ineffective and no longer relevant treaty organization, and the way he will do it is Article 5 of the NATO treaty is this what I call the Three Musketeers clause. It's all for one for all. But the fine print says that it has to be an armed attack by another country into a NATO country's territory, and then all the NATO countries come together to repel it. But that one word, ARMED, armed attack, Putin is never going to have an armed attack.
All right, Bergdahl, what troubles you most? There's so many facets to this story. What troubles you most about it?
That more Americans are going to die or be held hostage and be held by Taliban, because by doing this trade, the president's just put a big price tag. He's put a big X on everybody's back and a big price tag on the heads. I'm not as worried about the American military. We're leaving. We're going to stay in the bases. We're not doing combat operations anymore. We're coming home. But who are we leaving behind? It's the good and decent Americans who have gone to Afghanistan to teach Afghan schoolgirls how to read. It's to work in hospitals as doctors and nurses. It's to go as agricultural workers to help the Afghans develop an agricultural industry. Those people are now going to be totally unprotected, and they don't have big budgets. They can't afford, protection. They're going to be there trying to do good deeds, hoping that makes them somehow immune to Taliban attack, when in fact what's now going to happen is they're the guys that the bad guys are going to go after.
K.T. McFarland, speaking of girls who are suffering under the yoke of radical Islam, 20 Nigerian women, additional women, were kidnapped yesterday by Boko Haram gunmen in Nigeria. We talked a couple of weeks ago about our fabulous hashtag diplomacy, and the First Lady sending out a picture with her very sad face about the 300 schoolgirls that had already been abducted. What's happening there? Is there anything happening, and are we helpless?
The problem with American foreign policy is we are not the world's policemen, and we can't want it more than they do. If the Nigerian government isn't going to protect its own people, there's very little we can do. Now, if the Nigerian government says we are going to protect our people, we're going to go find our girls, we're going to prevent more kidnappings, sure, we'll help them. We'll give them the logistics, we'll give them the training, but we are not going to go, whether it's Ukraine or Nigeria or pick your country, Pakistan, Afghanistan, we are not nation building, and we are not responsible for all the ills of the world.
But they need to have the stomach to say, we must obliterate Boko Haram, let's go in there and just kill them all, basically, at this point.
Yeah, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with, killing bad guys that are killing your own people? It's just that whether it's in Pakistan with the Pakistan government not taking the fight to the Pakistan Taliban, whether it's the Afghan government, whether it's the Ukrainian government not protecting its own people and fighting for Crimea, America's not going to fight everybody's fights. We'll help you fight yourselves, but we're not going to fight for you. And in the end of the day, they've got to want it more than we do. And that was the whole point of the Cold War and ending the Cold War. Reagan helped others to determine their own destinies. He didn't determine their own destinies for them.
Well said.
All right, KT, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.